G'day, I'm Pete, the Aussie Bush Cop. In 2012 I retired from the New South Wales Police Force and moved to King Island to become a homesteader, and I'd like to tell you some of my stories. G'day everybody, thanks for joining me. Because of the good weather that we've got today, we decided to change location. And I'm sitting of course next to my old Holden, but it never occurred to me to ever include that into the introduction like you've just seen. But AI, you can do anything. So I guess back in the day, once upon a time, there was a HR patrol car. But it actually reminds me of a story that before we get into the stories, another story about this car is that when Janet and I used to live up in New South Wales, we went to a field day somewhere in the Orange area, and we were driving this car, and as you might know, with those field days, you get the men and women that wear the fluoro and they tell you where to park, and you know, sometimes they can be a bit excited about that, and that's fair enough, they've got a job to do. But on the way out, we left, towards the end of the day, and there wasn't that many cars around, and I was driving the old Holden out, and there's this bloke on the fluoro, and he started waving me down. I thought, what on earth does he want? Like, what have I done wrong? And he stopped me, he said, oh mate, he said, you know, yeah, and he sort of went to the driver's door and leant down, so he's looking in my face. He said, you don't see many old girls like this anymore. And I looked over at Janet, who's, quite pretty and younger than me. And I said, oh mate, she don't like it when you call her an old girl. And he bobbed down even further, looked at Janet and said, that's your daughter, isn't it? Anyway, that was a pretty funny day. Change the pace a little bit. The first story for you involves having to throw someone out of a hotel. And I almost mean that literally. This particular hotel, I won't say where it is, it doesn't really matter. But the night before, there'd been a brawl at this hotel. And I wasn't working that night. And so this Saturday night, I believe it was, we went to first order of business on our night shift, was to go to this hotel and lay down the law with the publican about what I expected from him in relation to people getting drunk and behaving badly. So we went into this hotel, and my partner on that particular shift was a big, slow-talking country boy. He was as big as a house. Anyway, lovely fella. But we went into the hotel, and I got the publican, and we went out to a private area. Now, on the way to the back of the hotel, I'd spotted a fellow who was quite clearly intoxicated. And as dumb as it is, but this is the law. You're not allowed to have your people on your licensed premises when they're intoxicated. And so I went out to the back and I said to this publican, mate, whatever happened last night isn't going to happen again. And because people get hurt, property gets damaged, and it's bad for everybody. And I said to the publican, and I pointed to this fellow that had already identified, I said, mate, he shouldn't be here. Get rid of him. So it's up to him to get rid of him. But the publican, well, for whatever reason, he wasn't willing to act on that and seemed in no particular hurry to do what I was telling him to do. So I said, mate, I don't mean tomorrow, I mean now. Go and tell him he's got to go. And still declined to do that. So I went out there with my partner, tapped on this bloke's shoulder, said, mate, you're intoxicated and we're asking you to leave. He didn't want to comply. So in the end, we had to manhandle him and deposit him on the front footpath. Well, I just mean walk him out. I then gave him a direction to move on, which is another power that police have to make people move on. He declined to do that. He was obstropolous, sorry to use a big word, but I then took him in. When he declined to move on, just going to stay there, well, quite clearly we couldn't just get in our truck and leave and just leave him there, because he was just going to go back inside. So I took him into custody and took him back to the police station. So in the process of finding out who he is, and what he is, I found out he was a soldier in the Australian Defence Forces. And he wasn't, I won't say what rank he was, but he wasn't a private, put it that way. And so I then subsequently dealt with him, and like I can't remember exactly what process I used against him, but I did that. And then I then made a promise to him, and I carried out the promise. The next Monday or the next Tuesday, whenever I was on duty, I already had the name of his commanding officer and the phone number, and I rang his CO and informed him as to the behaviour of one of his underlings, and left it at that. The next story happened at one of my one-man stations, and I hadn't been there very long, and I was making myself known while walking around the village and knocking on doors and just saying, "G'day, you know, I'm Pete, I'm your new copper," that sort of thing. But one day I was sitting in my station. Now, sitting in my station didn't take very long at all. I hardly spent any time in there. There's no reason to do that. Might have spent, you know, half an hour out of a whole shift in the station. The rest of it was out patrolling and doing jobs. Anyway, this particular day, I was just started my shift, so I was in the station, and there's a knock at the door, and these two really cute little girls were there, and they just come to report a dead cat up in one of the, it was part of the common. If you're familiar with New South Wales villages, often there is an area called a common where you can go and put a sheep or a cow or a horse, and if you don't have land yourself. Anyway, these two lovely little girls come there to report seeing a dead cat. Now, it's very important to give kids a really good you know, experience of speaking with a local policeman or any policeman. So I took an interest in it and found out where the cat was, and anyway, and they were really, you know, they were satisfied. And there was one of these. Then the next afternoon, I think I was in my house. You know, I think I was in my house because the house and the police station are under the same roof. Anyway, there was a knock at the front door of my residence, and it was these two young girls and a young boy. And one of the girls, who quite clearly was the spokesperson of the trio, she said, pointing at this young boy who had just had his head down, he seemed to not be there by choice, and he had his head down, looked rather embarrassed or something, and she said, with great importance, and it was very cute, she said, "I've come to show him the policeman." And so, you know, we had a few words and said, "G'day, mate, how you going?" and that sort of thing. And I must admit, I felt like maybe I was an exhibition in the zoo. You know, I've come to show him the policeman. It was very, very sweet and very kind, and it'd be interesting to know if that little girl ever sees this and remembers that. I guess she was maybe 8 or 9 years old, which would make her, well, you know, a lot older now. I can't really remember. Probably at least in her, maybe close to the, you know, 30-something now. Anyway, another time at the same station, there was a break and enter and stealing offence at the kiosk at the local football ground. And it was quite clearly, you know, young people or kids that did it, because all they did was they broke in through a roller door, I think. They went in there, made a hell of a mess, and you know, no doubt stole some lollies and drinks and took off. And you know, and I was not happy about that. You don't want to break and enter happening in your own village. So the next afternoon, I think it might have been, I was out in my front yard area. And there were some young boys walking past the station, and I could tell they were nice kids from a nice family, and I knew they wouldn't have been involved in it. But I just said to them, and I was being very friendly. I said, "Boys," I said, about this break and enter, and I said, "Mate, when I find out who's done that, they're going to get their backside kicked." You know, so I'm going to get scientific police there, going to get DNA, going to get fingerprints. Now, you know, there's no secret that sometimes police use a bit of bluff to get a result. And, you know, I can't remember now. I probably did probably did get the scientific police to go down there, just checking for fingerprints. Because it doesn't matter that, just a side issue, it doesn't matter that the kids that did it didn't have their fingerprints on record, because I can tell you that if they ever do come into custody, have their fingerprints taken, the big ugly computer's going to go, now hang on a little minute, back in whatever year it was, your fingerprints were found at a certain crime scene. Anyway, might have been the next day, these young boys come to see me, and they gave me a name, and it was just one of the kids from school, I think it might have been. So I was on duty, so I went down to his home, and his parents were there, and he freely admitted to it, so he would have got some sort of a warning. Police can give what's called a warning on the run, which is essentially just just get told off at the time, or it's something like a formal warning. I can't remember, but nonetheless, that's what happened. Another story for you is quite different. Is that one night I was starting shift at Dubbo Police Station, and a tremendously big storm came into Dubbo, like a windstorm and rain, fantastic winds that blew down power poles, lifted roofs off buildings. It lifted a shed, like a garden shed, from someone's yard and deposited that same shed a number of houses down the road. The wind was so powerful at the beginning, I didn't know when I got out of the truck to go into the station whether the wind was just going to blow me over. It did a tremendous amount of damage. And we had to rescue people. There was a whole bunch of people got rescued from a nursing home. There was other government agencies involved. There was people called rubberneckers who just go out and have a look. And there was, when I said power poles on the ground, which of course includes the mains wires on the ground. Now, who knows whether they're live or not? It's not like you can know looking at it whether they're live or not. There was people out walking around, looking at it. Oh, I had to rouse on people. Get home. You're not needed here. Go home. But one place I remember in particular going into was a shopping centre, and there was a girl who was clearly in the latter stages of a pregnancy, and she was standing in water that was somewhere between her halfway up to her knees. The ceiling had come in. It was catastrophic rain, and she was standing in about shin deep water, heavily pregnant, and was counting the money out of the till on the cash register that she was working. I said, "Ma'am, you need to get out of here." There was a fireman there as well, because they were the ones assisting in rescuing people. And she said, "Oh, no, I have to count the money." I said, "Ma'am, you're not going to count the money. Put the money in the safe and you can count it tomorrow." And there was, when I said the ceiling had caved in, electric wires in the roof cavity were hanging down. I could have reached up and touched them. People just sometimes they become so entrenched in what they have to do, as in count the money, that's supremely important. It was one of those times where it just wasn't. It staggers me sometimes how people lose perspective on things. Anyway, so she got out of there. And there was a funny end to that story. At the end of every shift in Dubbo, there was a shift changeover meeting, because there's they're 12-hour shifts, so the station's running 24 hours a day. And there was a command post. The police set up a command post at this particular hall during the evening for everything to be coordinated from. And we got asked to take some paperwork, I think it was, to this command post. And in charge of the command post was this inspector of police. So we had to go there. My partner for the evening was the same rank as me, but he was single. And one of the places where we had to help people evacuate from, there was another lady from a government agency that he took quite a shine to, and he wanted to get to know. So while we're at this command post, we just had a quick cup of tea. There was an urn there, and we had a quick cup of tea. My friend noted this girl there, but for all the benefit of being in the coppers, he was quite shy. I think it's especially shy when it comes to women. And I was married, and so Pete, I said, what I'll do, mate, I'll go over there and I'll just start talking to her, and then you come over, and when you start talking to her, I'll leave. Great way for him to be introduced and get to know her. Anyway, but I went over there, and I'm talking to this girl, but my partner didn't come over. He sort of didn't even have the confidence to come over. So anyway, at the shift changeover meeting, of all the tremendously dangerous and interesting, exciting stuff that happened, what did the inspector choose to zero in on? He said, amongst all that, there's Pete Gillett over there chatting up some bird. I said, boss, that isn't what happened. Anyway, so one more story for you is that we had a report, this happened in Dubbo, we had a report from a motel owner who had lost some garden furniture from the front of his motel. And he had not a suspect, but he had a vehicle of interest, because he saw a vehicle leaving with the stolen stuff in the boot of the car. And the car, again, I won't say what kind of car it is, because I don't really, no point really identifying it, but it was I would say within Dubbo, it was unique. And so we didn't have any registration details. But one day after that, my partner and I were doing who was working with me that same shift, would have been maybe more than a day later, and we were doing a foot patrol of the CBD area of Dubbo, and my partner spotted the car. She said, Pete, there's that car. So we did a check over our radio about the registration of the car, which gave us a Dubbo address, a residential address. And it was in a nice part of town. So we went there, and we could see the stolen property there was a fence that ran from the house to the next yard, like a fence that runs parallel with the street, called a privacy fence. We could see over the fence, and sure enough, there was what I heavily suspected was the stolen property. And lo and behold, we could hear a car coming down the street, and the car pulled in. Then the car pulled into the residence, and we had enough. Maybe we interviewed them there at the scene. Back in those days, you could actually interview people on the street. A bit different now. And they confessed to the offence, and so we recovered. We would have given them a field court attendance notice for an offence known as goods most likely stolen or otherwise unlawfully obtained. Recovered the property, put it in the back of our cage truck, and I probably photographed it and took it back to the motel. And that was a nice piece of work, because even though it's only maybe $100, $200 worth of stuff, it's good that it's very, very good, and I think I don't think I'm saying it too strongly, it's an essential part of policing, because to do that sort of thing, because it gives the members of the public confidence in the police that they'll take it seriously. And I actually really enjoy doing that. It's great. It's in some ways it's just fun, catching crooks, and having the freedom to do that and having the power to do that. But I will there's another side to that. One time I was called to a big supermarket in Dubbo, and where they had apprehended an old man for stealing, I think it was cheese, which is interestingly enough that I now moved to an island that's known for its cheese. And when I got there was 3 people who worked for the shop who had surrounded this man, who was either using a walking frame or was in a mobile scooter. I can't remember which, but he was very old. You could tell that just from looking at him. And I could tell from just speaking to him that he wasn't entirely cognizant, meaning it's quite possible he was in some stage of dementia. And it just made me cranky that these people expected me to take action against this man for stealing some cheese. It was a few pieces, maybe even just one piece of cheese that he picked up from the shelf and he walked out. It's not something, pardon my voice, it's just not something that I'm going to take action against. And in another vein, another place happened that an owner of a McDonald's restaurant contacted the police and wanted to report what's known as a fail to pay, which essentially is a stealing. You know, someone went in there, it was a flaming ice cream, I think it was, something worth about 30 cents. Next to nothing. It was a very cheap item. And what she wanted me to do, because she had the registration details of the car, she actually expected me to look up on the computer where this person lived and recover her money. I told her fairly bluntly that wasn't going to happen. I said, I'm not a debt collector, and if you need to come up with some other sort of arrangement. But it used to make me angry when people like business people like her expected to use the coppers as a debt recovery service. Well, that ain't going to happen. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you again next time.